Welcome to our deep dive into existentialism. When you sent in your sources on this topic, I have to admit I was a little intimidated. It felt like stepping into a philosophy class, but the kind where they don't give you the syllabus ahead of time.
I can see why you'd feel that way.
Oh.
It really does grapple with some seriously big questions about what it means to be human, you know, in a universe that doesn't hand us a rule book. But
Uh,
that's also what makes it so fascinating,
yeah,
so relevant, even today.
absolutely. I mean, who hasn't looked up at the stars and wondered, what's the point of it all? Or felt that pang of like, do I really have to make this decision? Existentialism dives right into those feelings.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that it emerged during times of huge upheaval. Think world wars,
Yeah.
industrial revolutions, those moments when people were really questioning the old ways of thinking.
So it was like the whole world was having a collective existential crisis.
You could say that. And out of that uncertainty, these incredible thinkers emerged trying to make sense of it all. You've got folks like Kierkegaard who wrestled with faith in a world that often feels chaotic.
Oh.
He believed that even without concrete proof, we can choose to take a leap of faith and commit to something bigger than ourselves.
That resonates with me. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut, even when logic fails you. Then there's Nietzsche, who dropped that bombshell, God is dead. Now, before anyone panics, he wasn't saying there's no higher power. It was more about how traditional sources of meaning, religion, societal norms, were losing their grip.
Right. Nietzsche challenged people to face the unsettling possibility that they were responsible for creating their own values, their own purpose. And that leads us to the heavy hitters of existentialism, Sartre de Beauvoir, Heidegger, and Camus. Each one brought their own unique perspective to the table.
I'm curious to hear more about them. Let's start with Sartre. I've always found his idea that existence precedes essence to be kind of mind-blowing.
It's a core concept in existentialism.
Hmm.
Sartre was basically saying, we aren't born with a predetermined blueprint. We're not defined by our job titles, our past mistakes, or even our family's expectations. It's through our choices, our actions that we shape who we become.
So we're not just living our lives, we're actively creating them. Talk about pressure.
Right, and that's where Sartre's idea of radical freedom and responsibility comes in.
Mm.
We have the power to choose, but that also means we're accountable for the consequences. He called that feeling of responsibility anguish, and let's be honest, who hasn't felt that weight when making a big decision?
I know I have. It's like suddenly you're standing at a crossroads with each path leading to a completely different version of you.
And there's no map, no guarantee you're picking the right path.
And which brings us to Simone de Beauvoir. She took these existential ideas and applied them to being a woman, arguing that women, just like men, have the right and responsibility to shape their own destinies. She challenged those societal expectations that tried to limit women's choices. Her work was truly groundbreaking. She helped pave the way for so many women to embrace their freedom and create their own paths.
Absolutely. Now, Heidegger is a bit more of a challenging thinker, but his focus on being and authenticity is key. He encouraged us to cut through all the distractions and really examine what it means to exist. He contrasted authenticity, living in line with our true selves, with falling, where we just blindly conform to societal pressures or lose ourselves in trivial pursuits.
It makes you wonder how much of our lives are spent falling, going through the motions without really questioning why we're doing what we're doing.
That's the kind of self-reflection Heidegger pushes us towards. And finally, there's Camus, the champion of the absurd. He believed the universe doesn't owe us meaning. It's indifferent to our struggles and desires. But instead of giving in to despair, he saw this as liberating.
Wait, liberating. How so?
Because if there's no inherent meaning, we're free to create our own. We can rebel against the meaninglessness, not through violence or destruction, but through embracing life fully, through creating our own values and living in defiance of the void.
So instead of asking what's the point, we get to decide on what the point is. That's a pretty empowering way to look at things.
Exactly. And those are just a few of the big names and ideas in existentialism. You can see why this stuff goes beyond the philosophy textbooks and spills into art, literature, music. Anywhere, people are grappling with those big questions about what it means to be human.
It's amazing how these ideas born out of such turbulent times still resonate with us today. It's like they offer a roadmap for navigating a world that can often feel confusing and uncertain.
Exactly. And that's what we'll explore further as we delve deeper into the core principles of existentialism and how they can actually help us lead more meaningful lives.
I'm ready to keep unpacking this. But before we move on, I'm curious what's standing out to you, listener, from what we've discussed so far. Which thinker or idea has piqued your interest? Keep that in mind as we continue our deep dive into the world of existentialism. Okay, so we've met some of the existentialist all-stars. Now I'm ready to dive deeper into those core principles you mentioned. The one that really grabbed my attention was this whole idea of choice and anxiety. It feels so relevant to like everyday life.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Existentialism doesn't shy away from the fact that freedom can be a burden. If we're truly responsible for creating our own meaning, every decision suddenly feels so much heavier.
No kidding. It's like, great, I have all this freedom. Now what?
Right. Both Kierkegaard and Heidegger explored this feeling of angst, this deep anxiety that comes with realizing the sheer weight of our choices.
I can see why that would be anxiety inducing. It's like one minute you're just cruising along, and the next you realize you're the one at the wheel, steering this whole life thing with no instruction manual.
And every turn you make shapes who you become, who you'll be 5, 10, 20 years down the road. No pressure or anything.
Definitely makes you think twice before ordering that extra dessert. Huh. But seriously, how do we deal with that? Are we just doomed to a life of existential dread?
That's where Camus's idea of revolt comes in. He said instead of being paralyzed by this anxiety, embrace the absurdity of it all, rebel against the meaninglessness.
Wait, I thought he was all about accepting that there is no meaning.
He was, but not in a passive way. Camus's revolt isn't about violence or anger. It's about this defiant affirmation of life, a way of saying, yes, the universe might be indifferent, but I'm going to live fully and passionately anyway.
So it's about taking ownership of our existence even in the face of the void. I like that.
Exactly. It's about creating our own meaning through action, through engagement with the world and with our own lives. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of existentialism. It's exploration of relationships.
Okay, this should be interesting. Especially considering Sartre's infamous line, hell is other people. Yikes, sounds a little rough.
Well, it's not as bleak as it sounds. It's not about all relationships being doomed. It's more about recognizing the inherent complexities and challenges of human connection.
Like, how do we reconcile our own need for freedom and authenticity with the needs and expectations of others?
Precisely. And how other people can become these mirrors, reflecting back to us our own insecurities and anxieties.
I've definitely felt that before. Sometimes it's easier to confront the vast emptiness of the universe than to face a difficult conversation with someone you care about.
It's true. Relationships can feel like these power struggles. With each person trying to assert their own freedom and subjectivity, it can get messy.
But isn't that part of what makes it so compelling? This messy, beautiful dance of trying to connect with other humans in a world that often feels isolating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of connecting, we can't forget how these existentialist ideas have permeated art and culture.
Right. Existentialism isn't just confined to philosophy books. It's in the novels we read, the films we watch, the music we listen to.
Think about Camus' The Stranger, Sartre's Nausea, Kafka's The Metamorphosis, each one exploring those fundamental questions of meaning, freedom, and the search for authenticity.
I remember reading The Stranger in college and being completely blown away by this detached protagonist who seemed to float through life, untethered from societal expectations. It definitely made me question my own assumptions about how we're supposed to react to the world.
That's the power of art. It allows us to experience these existential dilemmas in a safe space, to explore different perspectives and ways of being. And it's not just literature. Existentialist themes pop up in film noir, in abstract expressionist painting, even in the angst-ridden lyrics of rock and roll.
It's like this undercurrent running through so much of our creative expression. I never realized how much existentialism was woven into the fabric of our culture.
It's a testament to how deeply these ideas resonate with us,
Yeah.
with the human experience. But like with any philosophical movement, there are bound to be criticisms. No school of thought is immune to that.
Of course. So what are some of the main critiques leveled at existentialism? What do the naysayers have to say? All right, spill the tea. What are some of the criticisms of existentialism?
Well, one critique is that it can be a bit too focused on the individual. It emphasizes personal freedom and choice, but sometimes overlooks the impact of social structures and systemic issues.
So like, yeah, we have the power to choose, but those choices are often limited by factors beyond our control, like where we were born, our socioeconomic background, things like that.
Exactly. And that leads to another criticism, that existentialism can be a bit too pessimistic. It dwells on the absurdity of existence, the lack of inherent meaning. But critics argue there's also room for joy, for hope, for connection.
I see that point. It can feel a bit heavy at times, all this talk about the void and the weight of our choices.
And then there's the question of ethics. Does existentialism provide enough guidance for making moral decisions? Some argue that its emphasis on individual freedom makes it difficult to establish universal ethical principles.
That's an interesting point. If we're all creating our own meaning, how do we navigate those gray areas where our values might clash with others?
Right. And finally, there's the accusation of elitism.
Hmm.
Some find existentialist concepts too abstract, too detached from the everyday concerns of ordinary people.
So it's like, great, I have to create my own meaning, but first I need to pay rent and figure out what to make for dinner.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
valid point. But despite these criticisms, I think existentialism still has a lot to offer us in the 21st century.
Totally. It's a philosophy that forces us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to grapple with those big existential questions that never really go away.
And it's not just theoretical. You mentioned existential psychotherapy earlier. It's a real-world application of these ideas, helping people find meaning and purpose even in the face of challenges.
It's like instead of just treating symptoms, therapy becomes a journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. And beyond therapy, we see existentialist ideas woven into various social movements. The emphasis on autonomy, on challenging oppressive systems that resonates with movements for social justice, equality, and liberation.
So it's not just about pondering the meaning of life in a comfy armchair. It's about taking action in the real world.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And even on a personal level, existentialism can help us navigate the complexities of everyday life.
Okay, so how does this translate to like practical advice for the average person?
Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us who we should be, what we should buy, how we should live our lives.
Ugh, don't get me started on social media. It's like a never-ending stream of perfect lives.
But existentialism encourages us to step back from all that noise, to question those external expectations, and to ask ourselves what truly matters to me. What kind of life do I want to create?
It's about tuning out the shoulds and focusing on the wants.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose, even in the face of uncertainty and absurdity.
I think that's a message we all need to hear sometimes, especially in today's world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed and lost.
Absolutely. So to sum it up, existentialism isn't about providing all the answers. It's about empowering us to ask the right questions, to embrace our freedom, and to create our own meaning, even in a world that doesn't always make sense.
I love that. So instead of searching for meaning, we get to create it ourselves.
Exactly. And that's a pretty powerful and liberating idea.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. From the historical roots of existentialism to its key figures, core principles, and even its criticisms and modern relevance. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I hope it's inspired you, listener, to delve deeper into these ideas on your own.
Yes, definitely. Check out the works of Sartre de Beauvoir, Camus Heidegger, and all those amazing thinkers we've discussed, and see how their ideas resonate with your own life experience.
Because ultimately, existentialism isn't just a philosophy. It's a way of life, an invitation to engage with the world authentically and to create a life that's true to yourself.
Beautifully put. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. If we are truly responsible for creating our own meaning, as existentialism suggests, what kind of meaning will you choose to create?
It's a question worth asking ourselves again and again as we navigate the complexities of life.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of existentialism. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open to the wonder and the mystery of existence.